Hello and welcome to another episode of IndyCar Weekly. My name is Nathan Brown. I'm the motorsports insider for the Indianapolis Star, and with me is my co-host today, Stefan Wilson. We're going to recap the IndyCar race that just took place on Sunday on the streets of Toronto and look forward to the championship showdown that we have with these final 5 races of the year, which get going after a little bit of a break for the Summer Olympics. And we'll also talk at the end of today's episode about some silly season nuggets that we know are moving in the background in the IndyCar paddock as some of these teams are taking a little bit of a break. There's still a lot of things going on and a lot of things that need to get sorted over these next couple weeks before we head back to the racetrack for the August 17th race at Worldwide Technology Raceway. So I know we've been gone for a couple weeks. Schedules can sometimes be tough. I'm traveling. Stefan's traveling. We've got young kids at home that can throw us for a little bit of a loop, but we're happy to be back and happy to talk a little bit about where the IndyCar season stands 2/3 of the way through. So Stefan, thanks for joining me this I guess it's still this morning, taping on a Wednesday morning. Toronto, Colton Herta finally breaks through his first win in more than 2 years. A breakthrough win in some ways for Andretti Global as well. Let's start there. What were your thoughts watching Colton and Kyle Kirkwood go from flag to flag and being able to capture this really big, I think, impactful win for Andretti Global?
Yeah, just a really smart race in general by both Andretti, Andretti Global drivers. Colton and Kyle both executed, perfectly all day long. We had Colton just dominated the race, and then Kyle was the rear gunner. He played his part, was really smart, strategic on the restarts, and just kind of showed a level of maturity that these two guys are now bringing to Andretti, and just the way they're firing on all cylinders, just really impressive in general. Dixon challenged at the end, and Kyle did the right thing, just not going on the offense, not trying to force the issue, not trying to be greedy for himself. Kind of held that gap during that restart, and that just kind of made life easier for both of them going into turn one on the restarts. So just a really impressive performance, and I think it kind of shows how much that team has grown, how much Colton and Kyle have grown as drivers. There's been setbacks, there's been issues. It's kind of crazy when you say that it's his first win since 2022, because how competitive Colton has been in that span between then and now, and he hasn't had a win. And it just shows that not only himself, maturity wise, has grown and been able to execute fully the whole race, the whole weekend, but also the team as well, not making any mistakes. They were fastest in every single session, kind of a grand slam from that team. So pretty impressive job. And it really sets up nicely for Colton in the championship hunt as well. I mean, he's kind of been this dark horse. I haven't thought about him as being a championship contender, realistically. I mean, I knew he was fast. I knew he'd get some wins. I was sure of that, but I never thought that he was going to be able to put it all together and in a span and really challenge Palou, Dixon, and Power for the championship. But now he's sitting there. I think he's third in points, and looks like he's in striking distance.
Yeah, it was. I would have, one thing I thought of after the race, and the race broadcast on Peacock hinted at this at times during the race, but I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for those pre-race meetings that Andretti Global had Sunday morning, just to know, like watching the race, you got a little bit of a sense that maybe Kyle was told, hey, if Colton has an issue, if he slides through, into a runoff, or if he bobbles on a turn, if he obviously has a mechanical, has a bad pit stop, has a mechanical issue. If you get to a point where on pace, or, if you guys are put in a situation where you can challenge him for the win, then go for it. But we don't want you doing anything that would remotely risk either taking one of you guys out or, worst comes to worst, taking both of you guys out. We need this finish. We need a victory imperative over everything. And I just almost wonder if Kyle was going into this race almost thinking that he was going to be okay with second place, and that almost the priority in some way was
to bring it
to bring it home, to finish 1-2. And there was I think such a stark comparison, probably in a way, because we just finished watching the Formula One race earlier in the day, where McLaren had its issues that we don't need to go deep into, but you had Lando Norris finishing the race and so frustrated and dejected, finishing second. And then you have this visual of Kyle getting out of the car and running over to Colton, who's still in the cockpit, and just hitting his helmet, shaking his shoulders, so enthusiastic that his teammate and his good friend had won the race and that they had finished 1-2. And I think a lot of Kyle, of running the race as he did. I would have loved to see how they would have handled fights for the win. In this race, I think the only situation where that probably would have happened, given that the both of them ran fairly flawless pit stops for the couple stops that they made, that probably would have really only happened on a handful of restarts. And you could tell Kyle was really holding back on those restarts, almost playing defense for Colton.
Oh, for sure.
And holding Dixon and others, Felix, McLaughlin, whoever was in third at the time, at bay. And it was something that maybe wasn't the best for Kyle specifically, but it was the best thing for the team in the long run. And both Kyle and Colton made up some good ground in the championship. I mean, this was a great day for Kyle. This was Kyle's it was his, I think, first podium of the year, despite a really consistent season where he's finished in the top 10 almost every single race. I think that this was his first podium, obviously best finish of the year in second place. And so I still think, even though he would have loved to have finished first, I think there's probably something to knowing how much a win and also how much a 1-2 finish meant for this team. And I really applaud him for the way he went about, going through the 85 laps of this race.
It was a really Formula One-esque kind of domination that Andretti put on. So, really kudos to those guys. And like you said, they probably discussed it and was like, hey, look, if we're on a restart and you come out of turn 3 and you've got to run through turn 4, don't dive bomb into turn 5. And that takes us to our next team, Team Penske, which is the complete opposite of what we saw from Andretti. All three of those guys kind of out there for themselves, putting moves on each other. And in the end, it just hurt the entire organization. So maybe, there needs to be a little bit, Andretti setting the standards here of like, okay, this is how, as a team, we can both drivers can succeed, both drivers can, run their race, but we put the team above individual drivers. And
definitely,
what we saw from Power, that was it was tough to see, because he'd done a nice job all day, both him and McLaughlin, and in the end it ruined his race. And fortunate for him that there was only 12 finished on the lead lap. So the penalty he received, which was totally justified, while it put him back to 12, it didn't. It could have been a lot worse had there been 20 runners on the lead lap. So definitely, Phil from McLaughlin, that was a big hit. Like watching the onboard, it was crazy how much energy went through that car as it slammed into the wall. And you can expect that from one or two guys in the series. You don't necessarily expect that from Will, and you definitely don't expect that from a teammate. So I'm sure there was some choice words there. And, as you would like to be a fly on the wall in the pre-race meeting for Andretti, I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall for the debrief between those two guys. So,
yeah, agreed. One thing to close the book on the Andretti story. So I went into Sunday, and I'm not afraid to admit this, until it had been so long since Colton had won a race. we'd had so few weekends where Andretti had been able to finish things off. You kind of go into Sunday thinking, wondering to yourself, what way are they going to find to screw this up? Colton has had bad pit stops. He's had mechanical issues.
Overdriving.
He's overdriven the car. They've had bad strategy. I think back to whatever race that was. Was it last year? I think at Road America, where he pitted one lap too early and then having to do a massive fuel save to the end. Like it had gotten to a point where Andretti had won so few races, over the last 2.5 years, and have at the same time, as I mentioned, had so many great chances. They had 11 poles in the last 2.5 seasons, had only won twice. One of those coming when Kirkwood started from pole last year at Long Beach.
Yeah.
The other one being, so I guess that
Awesome.
stat. So they'd had 11 poles and 5 wins. So I said that wrong, but of that streak, Rossi won. And he started a little ways back. Kirkwood won last year, I think also in Nashville when he started, if memory serves me right, on the front row. So there'd been so many of these scenarios where you went into a race feeling like Andretti had the best car and they'd found ways to screw it up. So it was just cool to see Colton finally be able to capitalize. And as you mentioned, we'll get to in a second, was great for his championship hopes. Mm-hmm. Throws him, I think, 4th into the championship and has a legitimate chance. On the Power and Penske situation, I'm just surprised. Like, Will is not someone who takes too many risks. He's been a great member of the Team Penske organization. We didn't hear from Will after the race. Would have loved to gotten his take on all of this. So he was running, if memory served me right, he was running 5th. McLaughlin was 4th, and we still have so much time left in the championship that I just don't know why Will thought it was
ahead of Palou, I believe, at the time. Was he?
Yeah, I think at that point Colton was 1st, Kirkwood was 2nd, Dixon was 3rd, McLaughlin was 4th, and Power was 5th. They were both ahead of Palou. That was something that McLaughlin noted in his interview after he got checked out of the care center. They were both ahead of Palou. They were both going to make up even just a couple points from the championship leader. And I think Will went into the weekend just 35 points down to Palou. So making up a couple, you're right around right around that 30 points mark, still with 5 races, including 4 races on ovals left. That's plenty easy gap to make up. And it's in a spot on the racetrack that you just don't typically see a ton of passing. McLaughlin kind of left the door open a little bit, but for Will to be able to go and gain, 2 points from that, I just don't know that we were going to see anyone challenge Colton or Kyle for the win. If that was for, let's say, 3rd place, and Will or even 2nd place, and Will really felt like he had a car that could go challenge for a win, then maybe I understand this a little bit more. But when you've got about 10 laps to go in this race and you're fighting over 4th place on a day where Colton has led virtually the entire time, Kyle's ran 2nd virtually the entire time, Dixon is in 3rd place, unlikely to give that up. It felt out of character from Will. Mm-hmm. And I would have loved for us to have been able to talk to him post-race. I know we didn't have a ton of time in the post-race portion of the show, and Will might have taken off and been long gone in terms of being able to talk to him. I'm sure he was frustrated himself having done that, but I would just love to have been able to know what was going through his head in that moment, because it felt so out of character. Scott was understandably frustrated. I thought his post-race interview was measured. He didn't go berserk on Will. I loved the way he got out of his car and was doing the enthusiastic clapping at Will as he went by. We don't see, I don't think, enough of that raw emotion from guys at times. And I thought Scott really towed the line well between being professional, as you have to be as as a Team Penske driver above all else, while still showing his frustration. I do wonder how tense that post-race debrief was. I imagine it was probably one of the more tense ones that any team has had since the Andretti 2022 Mid-Ohio episode. That I don't know that we'll ever beat that one. But I bet this was a frustrating one because we can't forget Joseph checked up and had was it maybe Malukas run into the back of him, just kind of in the chain reaction of all of this. Joseph gets a flat tire. He has to pit under green and loses, he falls to the back of the lead lap too. And so both, someone who needed a amazing day to have any sort of shot in the championship, he falls out of a top 5-6 finish and falls back, I think, to 11th. So just a disaster of a day from
Team Penske. Yeah, no, I like you said, it's kind of uncharacteristic from Will. Just heat of the moment. Thinks he's got to run. There wasn't a whole lot of passing throughout the day anyway. So he thinks, okay, this is a shot to move up a position. Probably not thinking about the championship and the implications. And honestly, it looked like he got in there just too hot, and the door started closed, and it looked like he locked the rears a little bit, which then made matters worse. And just in a blink of an eye, then your race is ruined, and you ruined a teammate's race as well. So it's one of those things where I think had he had the opportunity, he would do things differently for sure. Yeah. So I'd imagine that debrief goes, if it was me, it'd be I messed up. Sorry. Let's move on. It's that's the only thing you can say, So
it's probably not much better if, regardless of if it's a teammate or not a teammate, but the fact that McLaughlin was still sitting 5th in the championship and still had a halfway decent shot. I think he was maybe like 65 points back from Palou entering this race, still with 6 to go, still plenty of ground to be able to make up on some short ovals that he, as we saw at Iowa, has been running pretty well at lately. It's just one of those things that I think you have to think about the bigger picture than just, you have to think of what's at risk, what can be gained, 2, maybe 4 points if you also pass Dixon for 3rd place versus hurting your championship, hurting Scott's championship, hurting both of your races. It's just, it was tough. And it was,
what was crazy too was just the strategy call from McLaughlin and the free team was severely compromised from the get-go. With it being a primary tire race, going to the alternates, starting on used alternates, was just like, the worst strategy call ever. And that hurt them from the get-go. And straight away from that first stint, halfway through, you're like, damn, he's got to do this all again on another set of alternates. So the fact that McLaughlin was actually P4 at the time,
he'd
done a really good job to overcome that.
Started 4th, was set to end 4th. I think all things considered, they probably would have taken that. They probably admit to themselves, hey, we messed up the call on how to start this race. But I don't know that he had a car that was going to beat Colton. I don't know if he had a car to be able to also challenge Kyle. So
he would have been 3rd probably.
They probably probably got close to maximizing his day, all things considered.
Absolutely.
And it was on to be another really great result for McLaughlin to really certainly position himself as a championship contender. I think he still has an outsized chance, but it's probably going to take 2 wins at least at these ovals down the stretch. And now we've gotten to a point where both of these guys are falling back. I'll do a quick run through the field just to kind of look at how this race panned out. And a lot of it both changed because of what we saw there from that incident that really either hurt or took out all 3 of Team Penske's cars. You obviously had Colton winning, Kyle Kirkwood in 1st, Scott Dixon on the podium again in 3rd, Alex Palou with quite possibly the drive of the day outside of Colton to jump up from 18th to just find a way to finish 4th. Another one of these Scott Dixon-esque days. Dixon himself started 15th and finished 3rd. Those types of days where they just figure out a way to stay out of trouble, maximize their potential, and just are spot on the strategy, excellent pit stops, and that's how you win championships. That's how Scott Dixon has won 6. That's how Alex Palou may very well be on his way to a 3rd. These are the types of days that win you championships. It's winning 3 or 4 races in a year is great. You oftentimes in a season have several guys that do that. Joseph Newgarden, for example, 2022 won 5 races, lost the championship to his teammate Will Power, who only won a single race that year, and Will won that championship on the back of execution on days where he didn't have the best car. Marcus Armstrong rounds out the top 5, a 3-4-5 finish for Ganassi. A great breath of fresh air for Marcus after what it's been an up and down middle chunk of this season. David Malukas with his best finish with MSR in his 4th start for the team. Also started in the Fast 6. Is continuing to raise his stock as a silly season contender, as we will talk about here later on in this episode. Rinus VeeKay, another top 10, 3 straight top 10s for a driver who's been sorely missing out on those. He finishes 8th. And I jumped over Christian Lundgaard, who finished 7th, started 16th. Very solid day for him in the RLL team. Romain Grosjean finishes 9th, maybe a little bit of a disappointing day, having started 5th, but all things considered, stayed out of the fray and still was able to register a top 10. And then Graham Rahal started 8th as well. Maybe would have liked to have been a couple spots higher, but honestly, for a season where Graham sits 17th in the points. This is just his 4th top 10 of the year. I think he will take those whenever he can get them. And then, as we mentioned, Joseph Newgarden finishes 11th, Will Power 12th. And then you had 3 other guys that finished off the lead lap, but were still running at the end. Linus Lundqvist, Teo Pourchaire, Toby Sowery. And then after that, you had 12 guys that didn't even finish the race. Some of them from a caution that we'll get into now with, 13 laps to go. Pato O'Ward, another just small miscue. And I think something that, again, is separating Pato and this Arrow McLaren team from being able to capitalize and win a championship. An unforced error from a guy like Pato, who I think was running in that 5th or 6th spot at the moment, wasn't going to have a car that was going to be able to win the race. Really, I think at that point just needed to close things out, take what the race gave him, survive to race another day. He was right ahead of Alex Palou, so he was going to pick up a couple points in the championship and hopefully be able to move on to the segment of the schedule in terms of short ovals, where I think they have the upper hand against Alex and Ganassi. Pato makes a mistake, loses the rears, spins coming through turn 1, goes into the outer concrete barrier in reverse, destroys his rear wing. His day is over with, and then chaos ensues as a handful of cars miss him. Marcus Ericsson, I think just probably in reaction to seeing Pato there, loses it himself, slides into the side, and then we have a really scary incident as 3 cars ramp over the front of Pato O'Ward's wing, the second of which, Santino Ferrucci, gets all 4 wheels off the ground, inverts, makes contact with the catch fence, gets overturned, hits the ground on his aerospring and the roll hoop, and comes to a stop. Luckily, he is okay. But a really scary incident, and one I'd love to get your take on the amount of time that it took for IndyCar race control to throw the caution. It's a little tough to see in some of the video footage that they had on the broadcast exactly when that full course yellow light board that they have adopted over these last couple of years turns on. You can tell from the lights that are on the back of the cars that blink red whenever we are under caution. Those took about 5 seconds from Pato, sliding into the concrete barrier. Took about 5 seconds to come on Pato had some very choice words after the race, as did Gavin Ward, about the length of time that it took there. What did you think about how that process was handled, having been in these races yourself and caring about how this process
Yeah. So just going back over the initial incident, I mean, at turn 1 of Toronto, there's bumps in the brake zone, and then that transitions into a very large concrete patch in the middle of turn 1. So the car is always kind of very free there on entry, and you're actually utilizing that freeness to get the car to actually rotate and turn for you, and it kind of helps you get just square up the exit and get a good exit. So it just looked like on colder tires, Pato's, known for being aggressive, and it just looked like he got a little too aggressive in this area. So that's what led to the initial spin. Easy mistake to make, and pretty, just it kind of just rolled into rolled back into the barrier. We've seen yellows happen here at turn 1 and over the years, and their race directors probably playing this, towing the line of like, is this just going to be a single car incident, or can we stay green at that point? Like, there was only a handful of cars that still had to go by the scene. But rightfully so. Like, if you're Pato, you're going, dude, I'm parked and much further around than we normally see. Normally, we see guys have contact going into turn 1, so the incident happens much earlier. You're not as blinded to it, and this happened. Like I said, it happened a little bit further around. He got a bit more of the turn done before he lost the rears completely. So he was a bit more blind to the guys that are coming through. I think in that situation, the race director's trying to keep it green, but in reality, I agree with Pato. It's probably one of those calls where it's like, hey, look, knowing the situation, knowing that this is, a blind corner, or the incident's blind, we just need to be a bit more proactive with going yellow there. And there's not really any good marshal post there, or that marshals can react. I also think on the team radio, the teams needed to have maybe been doing a bit better job going, telling the drivers that are behind that incident, hey, there's a car on the wall at turn 1. Stay right. I mean, you've got a very short amount of time to react to that, but that's one of the situations on a restart. If I'm the driver, I'm like, hey, I need to just be an extra set of eyes for me ahead of me. What's going on ahead going into turn 1? You don't need a spotter, but I'm just saying, like, if that incident happens, be ready to chime in and tell us, because turn 1, that's usually where something's going to happen anyway. You'd be expecting 2 cars getting together usually, but it's tough. I don't want to like beat on the race director too hard, because like I get where he was coming from. He was like trying to see if it's just one car, and then all of a sudden escalated very quickly, right? So I do think there's still a bit of room to for the teams to help in that scenario, and probably knowing the situation in that scenario needs to go yellow much quicker. So the worst part for me was seeing obviously the Santino crash was pretty scary. Getting airborne in a car, and an Indy car is never good, but on a street course it's unusual. Fortunately, the speeds were down a little bit, so it's not like getting airborne on an oval, but still scary nonetheless. But the actual forces involved, the G forces, when Nolan hit Pato, I think that's where most of the injury came from. Because I think what happened is Santino had ramped over that front wing, kind of skewed it up. So then when the next car came through, it was more of an actual impact, So, and the way that it forced it, like, had that much force that it kind of pulled Pato's car sideways, and then actually, it started to roll by itself, So that's how much force went into it. Parked Indy car, slid sideways across the track, and then, kind of accelerated him into the wall. But like, obviously, just that much force went into it, and that's the scary part, is when that force is not dispersed. Slowly, it's dispersed very rapidly. So, sure, that's where the injury came from. Hopefully, fortunately, Pato's okay. He's got a few weeks to recover from that and heal up.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I think come in the same places as you. I don't think the amount of time it took was egregious.
Yeah.
But I know that those moments in race control are very tense. They're frantic. Those guys they're not purposefully trying to do, to take a long time. I was last year during qualifying at Nashville. It was I think in the Fast 12, race control seemingly took what I thought was a very long time to throw a yellow for Scott Dixon, who crashed coming into the final. I don't remember the numbered corner, but it's the final corner before the start finish line at Nashville. So you're in the Fast 12. He crashes, puts it in the wall, and it took race control something like 8 seconds or so to throw a yellow. And it ended up being the difference between Scott McLaughlin being able to finish his lap that he was on, that allowed him to move into the Fast 6, and Scott McLaughlin losing his ability to finish that lap and ultimately not make it into the Fast 6. Scott then went on, because he advanced, he took pole in that race, and that played a big difference in how that race played out for him and how the grid was made up. And so at the time, Dixon crashed there. It's a kind of a blind corner. He was just off the racing line. It's a really tight spot. It comes after the alternate start finishing line. So, it wasn't a place where, if guys are finishing laps that they were going to pass through, but it comes very shortly after that. And so after kind of looking at how it all unfolded and the impact that it had on how the grid played out, I noted those things on Twitter, and I said, I think race control took a really long time. Another one of those moments where, again, I trust that race control is not doing anything to purposefully benefit a Team Penske car, but it benefited a Team Penske car. And it's just one of those things that you run into, where the visual of it doesn't look great when you have someone who both owns the series and also has cars running in it. And shall we say, I was summoned to the race control truck the next morning. I won't get into that conversation too much, but it was very tense, and I got a very thorough tour of the race control trailer and showed and told just how tough this job is and how many things that they are looking at and analyzing and balancing whenever they're making these decisions. I don't know that it changed my perspective too much, but it was helpful to get an actual visual inside that nonetheless. So I'm saying all of this, saying, again, I don't think this was that egregious. The one thing that I wondered in watching it, and I'd be curious to get your take on this, and wondering if maybe this is why we didn't see things get called just a fraction of a second or a second or two earlier. So the series right now, over the last couple years under Kyle Novak as the race director, they have made the decision largely because drivers and teams have asked for this. It's important to note. But if a car crashes, the driver is clearly okay. They're off the racing line. We've seen it at Laguna Seca, I think was the last place that last time I can think of it. They don't initially slam the button to throw out a yellow. If the circumstances allow for it, they allow every single car to pass by pit lane, decide whether they want to pit or not before the yellow is called, and then they throw the yellow. We saw at Laguna, it took an incredibly long amount of time, like a minute and 10 or 12 seconds, because that lap is fairly long before they finally threw it. So I wonder if, because that initial instinct, even though this wouldn't have been a place where they would have let cars run by for a minute or more, I just wonder if, because that is the instinct to decide, is this a place where we have to throw it now, or we can wait a little bit before we throw it? If there's, if that delay loses you a second or a second and a half, again.
Oh, for sure. You could tell that was going on. They were like trying to debate of like, we just had a long yellow, we're going green, and we, can we stay green here? Can Pato, get going by himself? He's got the hybrid. He only just rolled into the barrier a little bit, probably just broke the rear wing. So that's all going into the decision making, and that decision making process of being like, as cars went by there, that it becomes more and more obvious, like, oh man, we definitely should have gone yellow here. But in hindsight, they're trying to keep it green, which is what everyone wants. But maybe it's kind of a situation where you have these rules where it's like, hey, on the exit of turn 1 here at Toronto, if a car is in the wall, you have to go yellow straight away. If Sonoma, I know we don't race there, but another example would be after turn 3B, you come over the blind crest. Back in 2010, I think it was. I think it was Nelson Philippe was spun sideways after the blind crest. They stayed green. I think it was the local yellow. Will Power comes through there, blind, slams into the side of Nelson Philippe, breaks his back, and it's like that's another example of like. That's a hard rule where it's like if a car's spun there or off, immediate full course yellow. So it's one of those things where I think everyone can learn from. It happened. The race control is not doing anything nefarious. I don't think there's anything wrong with their decision making. They're trying to stay green, but going forward, looking at places where here's a blind turn at Long Beach exit at turn 1. If a car's off at exit at turn 1. We're going to have to go yellow. Like there's just hard rules in place that safeguard us against what we saw on Sunday. Because that was I don't want to criticize race control too much because I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to stay green. So I think there's a little harsh on the comments, but we also saw it in Formula One too. And it was in Melbourne this year, Australia. George Russell has his incident, spins off, hits a wall at turn 6 or 7, I can't remember what it was, comes back on, he's on the racing line, and they didn't go red straight away, or didn't go safety car straight away. So, I think we're, as drivers, it's like when we're in that situation, there needs to be a bit more understanding from race control of like, this is a rule, well, this is a scenario that it's immediate full course yellow to protect the driver that's spun and then the drivers that are coming by the incident. So
agreed. You mentioned the hybrid there too, and I think that's another factor in this where, this is what, just the second race that we've had on a road or street course since the hybrid is debuted, and part of one of the benefits of this technology is that drivers now have the ability to try, even if they stall their car, to be able to self-start. And so in situations in the past where if you can tell a car is stalled, you're just going to have to throw a yellow because the AMR safety team is going to have to come and start their car. And sometimes you're going to have to, in practices, you go red in those situations, and in races, you can typically stay yellow. But, in race control is just seeing a car, whether it's slide into a runoff or slide into a tire barrier or make contact with the wall. If it looks like they're stopped, the instinct is, okay, let's see if they can get back going here, because part of this technology is that we're trying to minimize the number of yellow flags that we have.
Yeah.
And even though this wasn't a spot on the track where I think you should have been thinking that, I do wonder if the thing that we talked about earlier with IndyCar wanting to wait as long as possible before they go yellow, if the situation allows it, if those two things are also factors in deciding whether you go yellow or not, versus car in the yellow or car, a few years back, we had car in the wall, immediately hit the yellow. And then you would have instances where guys would, that are leading the race or in the top 3 have their day totally screwed up because they're just unlucky with the time that a yellow falls. Will Power is someone who I feel like had that happen so much in his career. And it really impacted some championship runs that he was on. And so I do think from that standpoint, I like that yellows oftentimes, if situations allow for it, don't catch so many folks out and ruin what would have been really good race finishes. But I just wonder if this could have happened more quickly. Again, there's going to be some time between Pato hitting the wall, the folks in race control deciding when a yellow, if a yellow is going to get called or not, and then that flashing on the boards, and then drivers passing points on the course where they can see those light boards. I think, if memory serves me right, there's maybe a board before you get going into turn 1 toward the end of that straight. And then I think there's also one from watching some video footage there around turn 2 on the outside. So there's not necessarily a spot right at the apex of turn 1 where guys would have even necessarily seen it.
You got the lights inside the car. And
you got lights inside the car. Yep, you got your lights inside the car. You got your lights on the outside of the car. You've got
the team radio.
You've got folks, the corner workers who are waving flags. Obviously, the corner worker is going to be a little bit delayed because they have to hear it, grab the flag, start waving it. The folks, spotters on drivers' radios have to hear it through their radio, and then click on the button and tell their driver. The driver then has to react to that. So there's going to be a delay in all this. And so that's why I think being 5 seconds, I don't know that it was too bad. If this had been, say, 8 seconds, I think that's a lot worse. From watching the footage, the one thing that you could definitely tell is that the lights on the outside of the car, on the rear wing and the attenuator, seem to go on right after, right when essentially Santino was in midair. So it was, maybe 5 or 6 seconds after Pato initially slid into the wall. I think I just would have liked to have seen immediately Pato's in the wall. He has damage to his rear wing. That rear wing is destroyed. Full course yellow immediately. And again, there's still going to be a couple seconds there where lights have to flip on, drivers have to realize what's happening. But you just wonder if that might have been the time that would have allowed for this not to happen.
No, for sure it would have. I mean, like I said, I don't think there's any, that's something that drivers and the race control need to have a conversation about. Okay, there's certain scenarios where we need to go immediately. I get what you're trying to do, try and stay green, but in this specific scenario, has to go yellow straight away. But also, it's on the teams as well. I mean, the teams they all have 8 guys on the timing stand watching what's going on, and it's like, why didn't you guys key up and be like, car off the outside of turn 1, stay right. I mean, that would have been all over the radio. And if my guys on the pit stand weren't telling me that, and I'm, Santino or Nolan, I'm like, what were you guys doing? Because they can get the information faster to the driver than relying on, the series calling full course yellow. So
I wonder, I don't know if folks on the timing stand, do they have the broadcast keyed up? Are they listening?
Track feed. So
so you probably have track feed. So there's probably theoretically no delay there. So maybe you can get that. So maybe that's a way. I know I read a story from Joey Barnes from motorsport.com, who was on the ground. One of the few reporters that was there this weekend in Toronto. He talked to a couple folks, and some spotters in particular noted that the place where a lot of spotters are calling the race from, which is on top of Hotel X, one of the tallest buildings around that area. I think
probably blocked. You can't see.
Exactly. So he was saying that those folks that are spotting there, that area of the track is not visible. And so spotters who are watching and who are kind of your eyes in the sky, that's one spot, unfortunately, where it's really tough to get a good vantage point. So then you're left with folks who are watching the broadcast or listening and calling it. And again, that could just add to that just tiny bit of a lag.
Yeah.
Instead of
I know exactly.
Real time.
When you're looking down from the hotel, you can see the end. entry to turn one, you can see the exit, but that exact spot where Pato was spun in the wall, you can't see. So the spotters would have seen guys go into turn one. Pato wouldn't come out the other side, and they would be none the wiser. So they're obscure, but the guys on the timing stand, that's when they need to chime in. Understand that, hey, the spotter can't see that exact place. It's just a communication issue. I mean, at the end of the day, like even if there is a delay in that, it's the same delay that race control has. So if race control has time to throw a yellow, the guys on the pit stand has time to, inform the driver of what's going on at turn one, and break. Even if it's sort of could be distracting to hear from this timing stand as you're entering turn one. It's a hell of a lot better than coming into turn one and not realizing there's a car off to the left.
Agreed. So let's look now toward the championship. One of the things that I noticed when I was watching this back is Alex Palou, our championship leader, was the car immediately behind Pato when he spun. He missed Pato's front wing by, I don't know, maybe 6 inches, maybe a foot. And that ability for Palou to, make just the tiny adjustment in his steering could make a big difference in this championship. There are a couple moments here that really stick out when I reflect on the first 12 races of the year. I think of Palou missing that accident, going on to finish 4th instead of finishing behind Pato instead in 17th or 18th, and losing 20 points or so in his championship lead that right now is 49 points, could have been 29 points or something like that. Going into this 5-race stretch. I think of Scott Dixon being unable to start the race at Mid-Ohio because of his hybrid issue and finishing last, being someone who's still sitting 3rd in the championship.
53.
He's currently 53 points behind. So he goes and finishes that race with 5 points. And instead of Palou, who finishes 2nd, I think Dixon even didn't have a great qualifying day, but you still think if he goes and finishes 7th in that race, 7th gets you 26 points. That's 20 points that Dixon lost right there in his championship hunt. There are just a few moments that I think back to that have had a really big effect on things. And that's one of them. So let's look right now. Palou leaves Toronto 49 points, ahead of Will Power, who's in 2nd. He's 53 ahead of Dixon in 3rd, 57 ahead of Colton Herta, 71 ahead of Pato O'Ward, and 83 points ahead of Scott McLaughlin in 6th place. So those are I think the core group now of guys that I feel like have a legitimate chance. I think Kyle Kirkwood is there in 7th, but he's another good ways back, right around 100 or so. And I just don't know. For a guy like Kirkwood, who just registered his first podium of the year, I don't know that he's someone, maybe he goes and surprises us and wins, his 1st and 2nd oval races. And maybe he goes and also wins Portland. But I think that's the type of situation that he would have to be able to even have a legitimate shot. And I just don't know that I'm seeing that. So that's
even guys that are 49 and 51 and 53
and that's going to take
57 points back. Like that seems like that's a big ask, when you're up against Palou, even at, Iowa, Palou showed that he's no slouch on the ovals.
Nope.
He might not be as polished as Newgarden or Dixon on the ovals, but he's not finishing 5th, 6th, 7th anymore on the ovals. He's right there in the hunt. So, I feel like for Power, he's going to execute perfectly to have a shot here. Dixon, same. And some of these guys, Palou has to have a bad weekend, another Iowa race 1, in order for them to make up some of this ground.
I think either a bad weekend or I think if Alex wins a race, wins one of these last 5 races, I do think he then also has to have a bad race, probably, a 20th or worse finish to open the door. I think if he wins a race and the rest of them finishes, his typical, what we typical consider to be a poor race for him that doesn't involve him crashing or someone crashing him, that 7th, 8th, 9th place finish. I think that's what it would take.
Yeah.
If Alex wins a race and finishes 7th the rest of the way, I think unless someone goes and wins 3 of those other 4, I think Alex is winning the championship. I think, even if Alex doesn't win a race, I think someone's probably going to have to win 2 races of these final 5 to have a legitimate chance. You have that bunch of guys, Power, Dixon, and Herta, who are all in that 48 to 57 range. I think it's probably going to take 2 wins and maybe a couple more podiums. Someone is going to have an incredible 5 race stretch to catch Alex. I don't think it's impossible, but I do think we're going to have to see a heroic finish to the year.
I think the only Chevy driver that has a chance is Power. And I say that more, not just because he's the closest one in points and the next guy, Chevy drivers, Pato and McLaughlin.
But McLaughlin's there only 9 points back of Power. So
it's only 9 back of Power? Wow, that's shocking. But I still think,
8.
I feel like right now, since the hybrids come out, for some reason, I feel like it's benefiting the Honda drivers more than it is the Chevy drivers. We saw it at Toronto. Was it like the top 7 were all Honda drivers?
Yeah.
And at Iowa, we didn't see. I was shocked to see Joseph not really, showcase as he did the previous couple of years in Iowa. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It feels like it's kind of moving to more of a, it's a Honda championship. It's a Honda championship to lose, a Honda drivers championship to lose. So, I think I think it could be a showdown between Dixon and Palou. The way this is all shaping up. I'd love to see her to challenge more, but we just see it as first win of the year, and it's like, I don't know if we can keep that consistency up. Maybe they've turned a corner over Andretti and they can do that, but I haven't seen enough yet to show that that's going to be a consistent thing yet. I'd like to be surprised, but we'll see.
Yeah, I did misspeak there. I was looking at Colton's deficit to Palou. You're right. McLaughlin is 83 back, so he's probably too far. I think if he had been able to finish 4th and hadn't had the incident that he had where he dropped to, I think 16th. So 16th gets you, if I can do it. So 16th gets you 16 points, I think.
Yeah, that's about right.
So
you're talking another 15 points probably.
16th gets you 14 points. So fourth gets you points, 32. Fourth gets you 32. So he lost 18 points. So that would put him 61, and that's also bumping Palou back a couple spots. So he's probably 50. In the like 55 to 60 range points back. I think that for McLaughlin would make this a lot easier, and would make him someone, knowing that he won a race at Iowa. He finished 3rd. If he had, say, a doubleheader weekend at Milwaukee, like he did at Iowa, if he was within 55 to 60 points where he wins a race and finishes 3rd, if Palou finishes 4th or 5th, both of those races, then he's in a spot where he can make up a lot of points and potentially do this. I just think at 83 back, I think it's too much. Ironically, I think Joseph Newgarden could be one of Alex Palou's biggest allies in this closing stretch.
I thought you were going to say could be the dark horse, and I was like, I've given up on that one. No. I actually made a bet after we last did our podcast. I was like, I feel really strongly that Joseph Newgarden has an outside shot here with the schedule that's coming up. So I made a bet on him, and ever since then, it's just gone terrible for him. So I'm clearly a bad luck job for him. But I agree. I think he's someone that could take away points from McLaughlin, from Power on those oval weekends, particularly Milwaukee. And like you said, that's Palou's going to be very happy to see that, because that takes away 10 points from either of these guys and stops him if Palou finishes 4th, 5th, or 6th, one is contenders are finishing second, they're not making up that much ground. You know?
Exactly.
So
I think that could be
100%.
big. He could win a race at Milwaukee. He could theoretically sweep Milwaukee. He won 2 years in a row, and I think 3 fairly recently at Worldwide Technology Raceway. Joseph has. So I think he could factor into things here. When I look at this group, I don't know exactly know why. I think of the 4. I think Power could. I don't know that we've seen enough. Again, he has won twice this year, but I was looking at standings yesterday, and I just wonder if he has a stretch in him this year where he can have 5 races where he just hits on all cylinders. You look at his season this year, he had 3 second place finishes out of the first 4 weekends of the year at St. Pete, Barber, and the IMS road course. But then since then, he's had the crashing out of the 500. He had a so-so weekend at Detroit where he finished 6th and had how many pit stops and how many penalties, and really had an amazing weekend. He wins at Road America. He's kind of out of the picture at Laguna. He has ho-hum weekend at Mid-Ohio. He finishes 18th at Iowa after a big penalty catches him out. He finishes 12th after a silly mistake at Toronto. I just wonder if Will Power has this stretch in him to be able to catch someone. I look at Dixon and I kind of wonder the same thing a little bit. He's had, 1, 2, 3, 4 podiums this year. He's had a bunch of races. He's had a couple more where he's finished 4th. I wonder too if Dixon has this stretch in him. And so what I'm getting at is I wonder, there's part of me, I don't know that I'm fully convinced on this, but I might talk myself in. I wonder if Colton Herta is the driver who is best positioned to potentially challenge Alex Palou. We've seen Colton have some strong pace on short ovals at the Iowa race weekend. He started one of those races on pole. He started the other one, I think, within the top 4. The race he started on pole, he was running incredibly well until he got caught out by a yellow, ironically, from Alex Palou. He finished 5th. The other race, Andretti has run fairly well before at Portland.
Yeah.
If you look at his races, again, he hasn't capitalized on all of them, but since the 500 and really even at the 500, he's had, I think you could probably argue, one of, if not the strongest car at, probably 7 or 8 races in a row. Again, you have races like Indy, like Detroit, like that Iowa race where things didn't quite work out for him. But if he and Andretti Global can string together a flawless month of races, I just
the
feel
other thing as well that goes in his favor is when Andretti has a good weekend,
they are on it.
There's a lot of cars because you drag the couple of Meyer Shank cars in there too, so you create this buffer. And what we saw from him and Kyle, how they could work together, which they're gonna need that. They're gonna need cars in between where Colton is and where Palou finishes, and that's the way they make up a big amount of ground. So they need Marcus to get up there. They need the other, the Shank group to be strong as well and create this buffer to be able to take advantage of when they really strike it hot. And they did that to a point at Toronto, but I think the way that the race panned out and those last sort of 20 laps really favored Alex. They really did a lot of favors for him because before that yellow sequence, he was back in 8th or 7th or something like that, and all of a sudden Pato crashes, and then he makes up a position on the restart. It's finishes 4th, but really he was looking more like a 7th or 8th place car, So
he was behind. I think he was behind. I think there was a point in the race where he was behind Joseph, Power, McLaughlin, and Pato. So those 4 guys falling out over the final 15 laps makes
that's 8 points.
That's the difference between finishing 4th, 4th, 32 points, 8th, 24 points. And those guys obviously getting more points than they did. Power finishes 12th, could have finished 4th or 5th. That's a big difference too. So this championship looks very different. The reason I'm hesitant on Colton is the simple fact he hasn't won a race on an oval yet. I think he's certainly qualified. I think he's capable, but for whatever reason, he's just not quite been able to work through winning on an oval, and it's probably going to take 2 from him, along with Palou being strong. So I'm excited. I guess what I'm saying is I'm excited to see if Colton can do what we think that team is capable of. I think the fact that they put all of the pieces together this weekend, again, street course, totally different than these brand new ovals that are being introduced back to the schedule. We haven't been to Milwaukee since 2015. We haven't been to Nashville since 2008 or 2009. So there's a lot. These teams that are going into these races are going to be coming in blind in some way, even though we have a little bit of a little bit of testing the guys have done and will continue to do at those places before we visit. So it's going to take a lot from Andretti to, sometimes I think a team like Ganassi is positioned so well to come into where things are a little bit new, and just maybe even if they don't win, they hit really solidly. They make a few mistakes. They seem like they roll off. They roll. Yeah, they make the most of their cars. They roll off, maybe not at the top, but they work themselves through a weekend on a place. I mean, we saw it, a great example of this was back in 2020 where they win the first 4 races of the year in the COVID pandemic era while we were adding these aero screens onto the cars. And so it's going to take a lot, but I'm excited for this championship. I hope it's a situation where, we don't have this settled before we get to Nashville. I hope there's someone who's within
20 points or something.
20 points, 20, even 25. I mean, 25 points. That means, if someone goes out and wins the race and Palou has to finish, 7th, 6th or something like that.
That's the first time we've had the season finale on an oval in
exactly. And
2014 was the last one, I think.
Yeah. 14 or 15. So that changes the dynamic a little bit where you can have.
To me, it's more exciting because the things can happen so much faster. Yeah. The point swing can happen much faster on an oval, than it can on a road course. And, a lot of my favorite races to watch growing up in IndyCar was the season finale at Homestead. It was always just wild all the way, nail biting for the guys that are contending all the way to the checkered flag. So for the fans, I think it's should be an exciting finish. But yeah, also just to quickly note was Théo Pourchaire. Great job from him. To come from France on Saturday morning and make it, just the travel day alone sounds just insane. And then still manages to get in the IndyCar for qualifying and doesn't qualify last. So, good job, I would say.
Yep, agreed.
Never seen Toronto before.
Never.
Rocks up, turns up, did a solid job. So
yeah, and probably
worth noting. So
certainly wouldn't have been preparing for Toronto yet. He was let go from.
Yeah, I mean,
he was let go from Aaron McLaren. Yeah, let go from Aaron McLaren the weekling into Laguna Seca. So obviously he'd done prep for Laguna. Maybe there's a chance he'd done a little look at Mid-Ohio, but he was still a month removed from Toronto. So I'm sure Toronto was the last thing on his mind. As I noted in a story that I did this past weekend, kind of detailing his travel plans, the team was essentially sending him onboard video to analyze while he was in the air on the plane. So he was getting familiar with the track while he was in transit for the first time, watching onboards, learning about it, trying to cram while he was so if memory serves me right, and I think through this properly. So I think France is 6 hours ahead of the Eastern time zone. Yeah. So this crash for Rossi happens, I want to say a little after 4 p.m. Eastern. So that is 10 p.m. France time. I think from some of the reporting that folks did on the ground in Toronto from talking to Teo,
6:10.
he was still awake. He was maybe at dinner with his girlfriend. But again, this is after 10 p.m. Probably, I mean, certainly for me, it's my bedtime.
Yeah.
And he doesn't.
We're definitely asleep, you know.
Yes, he doesn't get the call from Tony Kanaan until after 6 p.m. Eastern time, which is after midnight in France, where he was. And they did all of this, figuring out his flight plan, him traveling to the airport in Nice, packing a bag hastily. He did all of this after midnight on what his body clock was set on. I know he had only returned from the States, I think 3 days before that. So maybe he was still kind of struggling with that jet lag, and maybe that's why he was
That's probably
awake.
what saved him. Honestly, I know what that feels like. And those first week, you're still awake at 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah,
so that's probably what saved him. Otherwise, I would have been asleep. Yeah. You would have not got a hold of me until the morning. And I'd be like, I got to go to the airport.
So at that point,
fair play.
At that point, it would have been too late. I mean, it's we don't need to go into the. But
fair play to McLaren as well for actually going through that trouble to bring Teo back, because it's kind of how it all worked out. I feel bad for Teo and feel like that was not ideal. But I'll leave it at that. But fair play for to McLaren just to be like, hey, well, do you want to get back in that car?
Yeah. So, Zach Brown said they thought he was the strongest, most talented driver who was available. I mean, the other options either hadn't been in the car in 2024 or even longer. Guys like Devlin DeFrancesco, Benjamin Peterson, Oliver Askew. Those were three of the names who were on the ground who could have hopped in. I think if Teo had not picked up the phone because he would have been asleep, or they just couldn't figure out the logistics, I think any of those three guys could have done a decent job. They would have also been able to practice on Saturday morning. I think it's even more impressive that Teo essentially was learning the track on video, watching these onboards while he was on the plane and in transit, but then didn't get to practice. Literally was thrown on the track for qualifying. Qualifying for a 10-minute session, and then he has a 30-minute warm-up where teams are wanting to do these full fuel long tire runs to learn more about the car, and he's learning the track essentially, probably still a little bit from that point. So the fact that he can still finish, I think 14th, again, a lot of attrition in this race. Had you not had a couple of these major incidents where the Pato incident happened, some other big ones that took out a handful of drivers. He certainly wasn't the 14th best car on the day, but the fact that he kept himself out of the trouble and brought home some valuable points for the team, I think was really big. And I'm glad you noted that. Before we finish up here, just we got a month now between cars being on track for races. There will definitely be a lot of things that are happening in the background, silly season wise. I don't have anything really to report right now. I'm going to try to do some more learning, make some more phone calls here in the next couple of days. I myself am trying to take some time off. So I will be theoretically off the clock next week on vacation with my family in Florida. I don't know if I will be able to be completely unplugged. There may be some things that surface next week that cause the work laptop to be pulled out. Crossing my fingers, hoping that that's not the case, but it would not be surprised. And so kind of laying the stage of where I think we are right now. I think the two biggest nuggets that have to fall, one of them, Alexander Rossi. He is the most accomplished, most talented driver, I think, on the free agent market. And I think he has a lot of options out there depending on how some things pan out. We were talking off pod earlier. I think there is a scenario where he ends up at Ganassi. I think there is a scenario where he ends up at RLL. I think there is a scenario where he ends up at MSR. Maybe if for some reason none of those three things pan out, Maybe there's a scenario where he ends up at Prema. I really don't see that as a high option on Rossi's list, because they're going to have to be qualifying just to make the field every single race next year if they don't buy a charter, which I expect them to at this point. And so, yes, they could probably pay Alex a lot of money. I think that project could be really interesting. But for someone who I think still thinks he has, and is proven, he has the talent to go out and finish on podiums, potentially win a race when the opportunity presents itself, and maybe have an outsized chance if he has an incredible season to still compete for a championship. Probably the best of those chances being at Ganassi. So I think he's the first domino that has to drop. And again, I think there's some other things that have to be worked out at some of his potential stops before this can all get figured out. Again, the Ganassi thing, I think, only happens if they choose to pull one of their drivers out of a seat, one of those being either Linus Lundqvist or Marcus Armstrong. Ganassi has to figure out what this charter program is going to look like before they can solidify their driver lineup next year. Are they still going to run 5 cars? Are they going to only be able to have 3 cars chartered? That's what we have been led to believe. That's what my reporting has told me. But again, this program has not been finalized. Documents have not yet been signed. And so we still need to figure out how that plays out. The other big piece to all of this, does Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing put Yuri Vips in the number 45? Bobby Rahal told me that they would like to do that, but in order to do that, they need sponsorship. Now, Hy-Vee has backed that car from a full-time standpoint as a full-season primary sponsor for the last couple years. Now, are they going to be willing to do that for a driver like Yuri, who, yes, is talented, but again, not to rehash this, who has the past that he has with the situation that he put himself in a couple years ago? I think that could be potentially really tough. And so I think that's why Rossi could factor into that seat, but RLL is going to, I think, do whatever they can to try to land Yuri a ride, because they appreciate the work that he's done in the background as their reserve driver the last couple of years. I think they feel like they owe Yuri something. They are very loyal to him. And so that's another one of these things that is still going to take a little time to get figured out, and why there is, I don't think, a slam dunk option for Rossi. I think there are a lot of things out there for him, but I don't think that there is an automatic one. And a lot of these drivers are kind of tied up in some way. Where's Renus going? Is he staying? Is he leaving? Where is David Malukas going? I think he could definitely end up staying at MSR, but let's see what some of the options are out there. And so I think there's a lot that's going to happen in the next 2 months or so between now and the end of the season. I think there'll be a lot of folks changing seats, and a lot of interesting things that could happen, but we're still, I think, kind of waiting for the pieces of the puzzle to be put together before the dominoes start falling.
Yeah, no. I think the Rossi to Rahal seems like a pretty logical choice, from their standpoint. They need someone that's competitive at Indy. They need someone that's marketable. He's an Indy 500 winner already, and at the same time, him and Graham, I think they've driven in the prototypes DPI at Daytona a couple of times together. So they're familiar with each other, both Indy based. It's like, that one seems pretty like a logical choice, a logical fit. So we'll see if it actually turns out, though.
Yeah. So again,
I don't know anything. I'm throwing up just my opinion based on what you were telling me.
No, I think there's again, there's maybe only, again, I'm not reporting that this is the case. I think I have noted that it has been a long rumored potential pairing in the paddock for some time now. It's gained steam. But again, I haven't reported it because, I either need a driver or a driver manager, agent, or a high-level team source tell me that something is the case before I can report it as fact. There have been a lot of people that believe that Devlin DeFrancesco is going to end up at Juncos Hollinger Racing. I think I was told this back first as a possibility back at St. Pete in March. I was told it again by a source I trust, but again, not a source close enough to the situation that I could report that something like that was done back in April at Long Beach. I've continued to hear these same things. I know I talked to Devlin at St. Pete. He said he wasn't sure if he was going to have an opportunity to get on track in 2024, but that he would definitely be back in 2025. And so that is where all of the arrows are pointing. And that is one of these scenarios that I think could happen independent of what happens with Rossi at a couple of these spots. I think Prema might, whoever they sign for their seats, one of them could be wholly unrelated to drivers in the IndyCar paddock. They have continued to say that they would like to sign one driver with IndyCar experience and one who is a younger rookie or just a driver that doesn't have experience racing in IndyCar that would seemingly likely come from their pool of drivers that have raced for them before in the junior ladder system in Europe, whether that's a Robert Schwartzman, whether that's Logan Sargent, whether that's another one of those younger drivers in the line towards Formula One that just either hasn't or isn't going to make it there. Callum Ilott, again, has some experience with Prema. So I think there are a couple of things that could happen independent of some of these dominoes, but the Rossi piece of it all, I think, is the one that we need to see how it plays out. And I think it could get worked out. In fact, it will say, I think it's likely that it gets worked out before we hit Worldwide Technology Raceway again. Rossi, an unfortunate situation, crashes into the tires in turn 8 during Friday practice, breaks his thumb. There are some people wondering, oh man, what a tough situation, what a terrible situation to be in. A driver who is injured and out of the car while they don't have a ride for next year. Alex is probably going to be back in the car at Gateway. Yeah. I don't think this has any effect on what his future is going to be. It's not a serious injury. I think he'll be just fine. But again, excited to see where he ends up, and I think where he does end up, I think will tell us a lot about what's going to happen the rest of the silly season. So there we have it.
Interesting.
All right. We will have another podcast. I know we had a little bit of a break here. We'll have our next podcast recapping the action at Worldwide Technology Raceway here in about a month or so. So for those of you listening, hang with us. We'll have a lot more great content. Hopefully weekly down the stretch coming to the end of the season. It's going to be a really exciting one. We're going to have a lot to recap on track, off track, looking at the championship. So thanks for those who continue to listen, download, subscribe, review, whether you're listening on your typical podcast platforms, watching on IndyStar.com or watching on YouTube. We appreciate the support. Tell your friends. We enjoy doing this, and we'll continue to enjoy doing it as this season comes to a close. For Nathan Brown, thanks to Stefan Wilson for joining me again. That is it for this week's edition of IndyCar Weekly.